And hello, everyone. Thanks for streaming with us here on ABC News Live. I'm Kira Phillips.
And I'm Terry Moran at the White House today. The National Traffic Safety Board is investigating what caused an Amtrak train to derail and split apart, killing 3 people and injuring more than 50 others. The train derailed near Joplin, Montana, with more than 150 people on board, sending passengers flying through cars, some even escaping by breaking windows and crawling out.
And a federal judge is set to rule that the man who shot President Reagan can go free. John Hinckley Jr. has been living in Virginia since his release from a Washington hospital in 2016, but has been under court-ordered restrictions barring him from owning a gun or contacting Reagan's family. Hinckley wounded Reagan, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, and press secretary James Brady in the 1981 shooting, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge says Hinckley hasn't shown any symptoms of active mental illness or violent behavior, and that, quote, if he hadn't tried to kill the president, he would have been unconditionally released a long time ago.
And Instagram is pausing work on its app experience for children amid claims that Instagram is, quote, toxic for teens. A report from the Wall Street Journal recently revealed that Instagram increases body image issues for 1/3 of all teenage girls on the app. But Facebook, which owns Instagram, says the report misinterprets the data. Despite the pause here, Instagram says that building Instagram Kids is the right thing to do and that they'll continue to build parental supervision tools for teens. So, President Biden's agenda is at a crossroads this week. Democrats up on Capitol Hill, they are considering what to do because they're in charge of both houses of Congress, and they're deciding how to compromise with each other to get his bipartisan infrastructure deal and a $3.5 trillion spending plan on what they call human infrastructure across the finish line. A Senate vote today to keep the government funded seems doomed at this hour. A lot going on here.
And to talk about it all, Terry, is what it means to the American people. We've got all angles covered. We've got Terry there at the White House, ABC congressional correspondent Rachel Scott at the Capitol, and ABC News political director Rick Klein. All of us to have a discussion here. Rachel, let's start with you. House Speaker Pelosi originally scheduled this infrastructure vote for today. Now it's been pushed back until Thursday. Why'd she do that, and what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, Kira, this is crunch time. This is an enormous balancing act for Democratic leadership and for President Biden. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi originally scheduled that bipartisan infrastructure vote over in the House for today, a promise that she made to moderate Democrats. Well, she had to push that back because, as Pelosi says herself, she does not come to the floor to lose. And that vote would have not gone well if they moved ahead with it. I talked to progressives just days before this vote that was supposed to be today. They told me that they would have voted against it if they did not have, a framework or some type of agreement on this much larger economic package that's supposed to be $3.5 trillion. The big problem here, though, is that many moderates say that price tag is just too high. And so now you have this enormous challenge for President Biden, for Democratic leadership, to try to pull together all these different wings of their party. They'll be meeting behind closed doors today at 5:30 to try and iron out their issues. They are optimistic that they can do it, but the margins in the House and Senate are just so small. There are no room for error here. 50-50 split in the Senate, and they can only afford to lose 3 votes over in the House.
And Terry, as you mentioned up at the top of the show, we're talking about 2 bills here. One focused on hard infrastructure, the roads, bridges, and the like. And then the other one, it's the trillions of dollars in so-called human infrastructure, which includes a huge boost to the social safety net. So you were just in the White House briefing. What does the success or failure here mean for this presidency?
Well, Kira, as the president himself might put it, this is a big flippin' deal, and he wouldn't use the word flippin' either, because this is his agenda, his ambition to be a transformational president. These items in this agenda, especially that social spending package, child care for so many families, free community college, climate change, all kinds of things that he wants to go down in history as providing for the American people, lifting people up, he calls it. This is all riding in the next few days here in Washington, and he knows it. Now, as Jen Psaki was just telling us in the briefing room, you know, this is not his first rodeo. Joe Biden has been around Washington for 40 years. And so he has seen these big cliffhanger weeks where it goes right down to the wire on big bills, and he is working the phone. She noted he doesn't really have much on his schedule this week. That's so that he can be flexible to respond to the demands and the questions and the deal making that the moderates in his own party want to do, and that the progressives want to do too. He's trying to bridge that gap. And as she said, we're all eating our Wheaties here this week.
So, Rick, what's going on with this divided Democratic Party, and what kind of challenge is this presenting for Speaker Pelosi and the president?
Kira, this is all about trust. We talk so much about how Democrats and Republicans don't get along. These are Democrats that don't trust other Democrats to go along with the commitments they've made. In the immediate term, the reason that the vote on the hard infrastructure bill is pushed back is because progressives say they're not going to vote for it unless they also get that larger package, and they think that moderates are going to jump ship on that. It comes down to the fact that they have different, they represent different districts, different constituencies in the party. They see different politics involved, and knitting that together at this time with those narrowest of majorities is just the biggest challenge, perhaps, of Pelosi's career, up to and including the passage of the Affordable Care Act a little bit more than 10 years ago. All of this comes down to the Democrats realizing that the failure, potential failure, is a worse option than anything else. And that really is the motivating factor that can potentially unite Democrats. And I'll tell you, Biden and Pelosi both, there's a lot of questions about how they've handled it to date. Those get answered if they're able to get the votes done. If not, it is going to be one big swing and a miss that's going to have big implications for the country and for the party.
And Rick, one other thing that Jen Psaki was telling us in the briefing room here, that this is similar to the big package that he passed, the American Rescue Plan, at the beginning of his presidency, and that was there were a lot of questions around whether that could get done, whether Democrats could come together with it, get any Republican support. They aren't going to get any support for these bills. The Republicans have made that clear. But President Biden is in a very different political position right now, isn't he? I mean, his polls have sagged considerably. He was over 50% back then. Now he's kind of hovering around 45%, maybe heading south. How do you read the political situation and the president's clout to get something this big done?
Yeah, Terry, the premise that this is based on is that this is a relatively popular president pushing relatively popular things. Well, to the extent that his own personal approval rating is down, that's a factor. And on the individual items, the Democrats have spent so much time arguing with each other about the details, that's even taken a hit. So that's what makes this difficult, is you have a president perhaps at the lowest point yet in terms of his political sway inside his own party. And I'll tell you, Terry, I've been thinking a lot about the history. I'm here in Chicago now because Robin Roberts just did an interview with President Obama. We'll have more of it tonight on World News Tonight and on GMA tomorrow. But the historical perspective of President Obama, I think, is important in this moment. Obama and Biden both remember what it took to get things done with narrow majorities in the Obama-Biden years, and they're going to have to pull off some kind of a magic trick because it's even narrower now, and the Democrats right now are even more divided against themselves.
And Rachel, while we have you up on the Hill there, let's just talk about for a minute the government spending and debt ceiling deadline this week. What would it mean for the government to shut down during a pandemic? And we can imagine how that's going to impact a lot of people.
It really would, Kieran. I think Dr. Fauci said it best when he said there could not be a worse time for the government to shut down in the middle of a pandemic. He said it would have a tremendous effect, he believes, on the way the government operates at this point. I think that is the big question that everyone's trying to figure out at this moment. Some reports suggest that some workers with the CDC could possibly be furloughed. Others may be deemed essential workers. But I think altogether, Democrats and Republicans are going to want to try to avoid this. Obviously, Republicans say that they will not push past a government shutdown unless Democrats raise the debt ceiling on their own at this point. But even the debt ceiling, not raising that would have a significant consequence for America as well. By October, the Treasury Secretary says we would not be able to pay our bills. Some analysts also suggest that millions could lose their job as well.
And Rick, as you mentioned today, you're in America's greatest city, my hometown, Chicago, for this very special reason, this interview that Robin Roberts has with the Obamas. Tell us more about it. Well, why are they doing this now? And what are they saying?
Greatest city, maybe not the best football team, Terry, after yesterday's performance, but this is a big moment for the Obama post-presidency. The groundbreaking of his presidential center taking place on the south side of Chicago. And I'll tell you, the president is very, very passionate about choosing that location to empower the community that he and Michelle met in, that he raised his family in. You see there the miniature model of the presidential center. He's excited about that and fired up about that and about this moment. He just turned 60 years old. He's got a lot of years ahead of him to bring in new generations and talk about what that legacy can mean for Chicago and well beyond.
All right, Rick Klein, you cruel man. Thank you very much for that. And Rachel Scott as well. Thanks very much for being with us. All right, now to some serious breaking news for a moment. We do have breaking news here. The jury has reached a verdict in the trial of musician R. Kelly. And the singer faces racketeering and sex trafficking charges. We're going to bring that verdict to you live as soon as we have it.
Meanwhile, President Biden got his booster shot of the Pfizer vaccine today, saying that while boosters are important, the most crucial thing we need to do is get more people vaccinated. Meanwhile, officials are taking drastic action now to prepare for mass firings and staff shortages at New York hospitals as the state's healthcare worker vaccine mandate takes effect today. It's estimated 72,000 unvaccinated hospital workers could lose their jobs for refusing to comply, and the governor is prepared to bring in state workers, even the National Guard, to help. Let's bring in Tom Quattrochi, the president of the Erie County Medical Center Corporation there in New York, along with Dr. Darian Sutton, our ABC News medical contributor and also an emergency physician. For more on this, Dr. Sutton, let's start with you. President Biden continued to stress that while he was happy to get his booster, this is still a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So how important do you think it was for the president to get that booster shot live on our air as America watched?
I think it's incredibly important for anyone with a public platform to express their trust in science. And we know that the president is 78 years old and more than 8 months beyond his initial dose of the vaccine. So he's listening to the science, which shows that he has some additional protection with getting an additional shot. But we also know that vaccines continue to prove effective regardless of someone's age or their medical history. And just to add some numbers to this, of the more than 181 million people who have been fully vaccinated, only approximately 19,000 have sustained a breakthrough that has required a hospitalization. And of that small fraction, the majority are over the age of 65. So the president is listening to the science and understands that he attained some additional benefit. But of course, like he said, we cannot distract from the primary issue, which is that the unvaccinated are the primary source of infection, hospitalization, and current death rates.
Vaccinated are obviously healthcare workers. That's an issue that here at the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about the situation in New York there, the vaccine requirement for healthcare workers. How is it affecting your facilities? How concerned are you about it? How many workers do you think you might stand to lose because they don't comply with the vaccine requirement and don't want to get vaccinated?
Well, I have to say, Terry, that in my personal
through the pandemic, and one of our issues is staffing. In general, let alone with the vaccine mandate. We're in favor of the vaccine mandate, but feel we just need a little more time to work through some issues. We have about 5% of our workforce, and while that may not sound like a lot, the bottom line is that we already have a staffing shortage to begin with and have over 400 positions open. One of the other things that's happening is downstream, the nursing homes really are having issues. So our nursing home has about 20% of its workforce that's going on unpaid leave as of today because they have not received a vaccination. That's happening all over the community. So we can't discharge patients into the community, which ultimately backs up our emergency rooms. So it's a real concern. Again, we're trying to work through the issues. We're trying to educate people. We're trying to explain them the importance of getting vaccinated, but it continues to be a challenge for all of us.
And Darian, one argument you hear from healthcare workers is that so many of them have already had COVID, so they have some immunity and don't need the vaccine. Do they have a point?
I understand this point, but there are some faults to this argument. I'll first say that someone who has had a relatively recent infection has a very low risk of getting a reinfection within the first 3 months. But there are some issues with that. We've seen in studies that those who have had a natural infection have variable responses to the infection. Some have elevated antibody levels, and we can presume that they have more protection, and others do not. And we also don't yet have a test to determine who is immune and who isn't. So with that being said, the safest, lowest risk option still remains to get vaccinated. And as healthcare workers, we have an obligation to take care of our vulnerable patients and not spread additional disease. And so this isn't new for us to require something like vaccinations, as we have medical clearances for other diseases that we commonly have to go through on a yearly basis.
And Dr. Sutton, if I can follow up on that, there are all kinds of reasons people might not get vaccinated, libertarian reasons, some people misinformed, whatever, religious reasons for some. But healthcare workers, can you help us understand why a public health worker would choose not to be vaccinated? And have you seen that in your own work, given all the available information that they've got working on the front lines about how effective and protective these vaccines are?
Well, Terry, I have to say that I have seen it, in small percentages, albeit, but I have certainly seen it. I know that in my large tertiary care hospital here in Los Angeles and the hospitals that I've worked with in New York City, we've seen lower rates of this. And I think that the farther attached or the farther associated someone is to a surge in COVID-19, the more likely and more susceptible they are to misinformation. As healthcare workers, we're not immune to misinformation. And some of us require a little bit more help to parse through the information to feel more comfortable in the decision. But it still stands that vaccines are proving effective. And if we have to, we use science in every other format in medicine, and we have to use it in this discussion. And we know that those who are vaccinated have a lower risk of infection, and therefore we can assume that they are lower risk in transmitting that virus and to our vulnerable patients who are immune compromised and immune suppressed. So it still stands that vaccines are proving effective, and they work, and they should be used in hospital care systems.
And Tom, state data shows that 84% of hospital workers in New York are fully vaccinated. So what impact could this requirement have statewide?
Well, again, it goes back to the staffing shortage. We're all very concerned that we're going to be able to take care of patients. And we're working with the state hand in hand to make sure we do get individuals vaccinated. But we're going to have to get obviously more aggressive when it comes to recruitment in the short term. We've tried to work with agencies, as you can imagine, all over the country. Agency employees are being scooped up, and the price per hour keeps going up and up and up. So it's a real challenge, but the impact is going to have to be watched. We're going to have to see if there's some mitigating things that we can do to ensure that we have staff to take care of patients, and we're working very closely with the current New York State administration.
And let me follow up on that with you, Tom. So Governor Hochul, your new governor there in New York, she said she's prepared to send in the National Guard to help you out and help fill these gaps. That's just an extraordinary step. I don't know if that's happened before in a public health emergency like this one. Would you welcome that in Erie County? Do you think, what would that look like?
We'll take all the help we can get. At the end of the day, we need nurses. That's really the most important person that we need in our healthcare system to be able to take care of our patients. And a significant amount of nurses have said that they won't get the vaccine. We shouldn't forget the 95% of the individuals that said they would, because that's very important. We should applaud them, and they continue to work here and work very hard and pick up extra shifts. But you know, at the end of the day, we need healthcare professionals, and we'll take the National Guard or whoever else can help us. If it's other nurses from downstate, that's been talked about also to help us up here. Whatever the case may be, we're obviously working with Governor Hochul and their team around how we can mitigate some of these circumstances.
And Darian, meanwhile, vaccine requirements are causing issues in the NBA. Brooklyn Nets star now, Kyrie Irving, missed the team's media day today due to COVID-19 protocols, declining to share his vaccination status. What do you think about this? What would you tell players who are skeptical of getting the vaccine in such close quarters with other players and fans? And how can teammates or friends help convince others?
I would remind them that although the risk is lower, given the fact that these professional athletes are in the best shape of their lives, the risk is not zero. And we've seen evidence of long-term effects of COVID-19 as well as acute effects of COVID-19 in healthy individuals. And so we know that COVID-19 vaccines are proving effective in preventing disease, but also as a professional athlete, you're traveling around the nation, you're in close contact with fans, and you're working out and breathing at higher rates with your teammates. And so there's an increased risk there. And so I think that the best way to protect protect against that is to get vaccinated. But I do think that it just probably requires some time and some patience so that someone can feel understanding in their information around them and comfortable in their decision.
Dr. Darian Sutton and Tom Quattrochi, gentlemen, thanks for the great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really informative there. Well, another situation, we caught up with a few of the millions of Americans who are now eligible for boosters, just as I just saw President Biden get his. Here's what they had to say about these boosters.
I think everyone should get their booster shot as soon as possible.
I intend on getting the booster shot because of my age, and I have some immune deficiency, so I think it's prevalent that I get the booster shot.
I will be getting the booster shot as soon as they are available to us. I understand the CDC has approved them, and we're just waiting for the time on it.
Haven't decided yet. Wife and I actually were talking about that today. We wouldn't be eligible for the third shot until November, December range because of the 6-month time frame that they have. So that gives us a little time to watch and make sure there's no other issues with people getting that third shot. And because we keep hearing some people say you shouldn't get it and some people say you should, and there's too much stuff out there.
Yeah. Right.
So we haven't decided whether we will or we won't.
I am going to get a booster shot because I'm going to wait till the Moderna so it all matches, because I am immunity compromised, so I definitely will get it.
All right, coming up, running on empty. Fears of a fuel shortage in the UK leading to panic buying, long lines, and gasoline rationing at several stations. Why a driver shortage may be to blame, and what the government is doing about it when we come back. And we have breaking news for you now. A jury has found singer R. Kelly guilty of racketeering in federal court. R. Kelly was facing charges for being the ringleader of a decades-long scheme to recruit women and underage girls for sex. Let's bring in ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky, along with Terry Austin, host and legal analyst with the Law and Crime Network, for more. Terry, I want to start with you. We were talking all morning about these charges and what was going to happen to R. Kelly. We were both discussing how surprised we were also that he had been acquitted 13 years ago. What do you think made this time so different?
I think this time it was different because the federal prosecutors here brought that RICO charge. They were able to reach back over years and bring in multiple victims who testified, and their testimony was extremely clear and it was consistent. R. Kelly was controlling, he was abusive, and he trapped these women. He did not let them, quote unquote, escape. And I think the jury heard that. They also saw video evidence, so they saw what was going on. And I think that was the major difference between this federal court case against him and the case back in 2008 when he was not found guilty. And frankly, there wasn't a witness in that case who could get on the stand and talk about what R. Kelly did.
And also his personal assistant, right, of 16 years, came forward with some pretty explicit details. I mean, when you're working side by side with someone as a personal assistant for almost 2 decades, you know a lot.
That's right. She saw all of the women coming in and coming out. She actually was their escort at certain times. She took them shopping. She sort of took care of them, but she knew what was going on. She heard about the abuse that was going on. She saw what was going on behind those closed doors in terms of his assaults against those women. And so I think the jury looked at her and they believed her because it wasn't secondhand, it was firsthand. She was very close to everything that occurred. And so I think this is one of the reasons we got the verdict. And it's relatively quickly. They only started at the end of the week, and now it's Monday, so not that many hours they've been deliberating. In fact, I think it's probably 6 to 9 hours. So I think, relatively speaking, it's a very fast verdict. And when you get a verdict back that quickly, it means that the jury was very, very careful, but it also means that they were pretty consistent in the way they were thinking. There were probably not that many individuals who were disagreeing with whatever the consensus was. If you recall, they did have one or two questions about Sonia, who was one of the witnesses, and they wanted to know whether or not they could see the map of the studio and whether or not she had the ability to escape. But other than that, it doesn't sound like they had too many questions about the guilt or innocence of R. Kelly.
And our investigative reporter, Aaron Catersi, calling in as this verdict has been read. Aaron, apparently R. Kelly sat motionless in the courtroom. I'm seeing some of the detailed color from inside the courtroom coming out right now, his facial expression hidden by his mask. What can you tell us about how things went down when the verdict was read, and also finding out that he was found guilty on all 9 counts of racketeering and sex trafficking charges today?
This was a relatively quick verdict. The jury did not even deliberate on a full day. This was the second day of deliberations after they got the case in the middle of the day on Friday. They took the weekend to think it over, but it doesn't appear they had a lot of doubt, Kira. Instead, we have a jury coming back with a verdict that suggests that R. Kelly was the ringleader of a criminal enterprise, as prosecutors put it, that not only bolstered his music and his image, but that was also there for his sexual gratification and recruited women and girls, sometimes threatened them, held them against their will, forced them into not only different sex acts, but into certain behaviors that were, that were dictated by Kelly. And this went on over a number of decades, almost 3 decades worth of criminal conduct. And Kira, the specific allegations here involve 6 women, including the late singer Aaliyah, but we know that there are others, and he will stand trial in Chicago next on additional federal charges.
And Terry Austin, if I can come to you on a question. This charge is a landmark charge in the music industry. There's been a lot of sex with underage girls in the music business. There's been exploitation of underage girls. It was kind of almost boasted about at one point in songs that groups sang. Is this a moment of reckoning for that business? And also, someone noted that this is really the first major Me Too case that involved the accusations of black women being heard. How do you read this?
You know, I think that's exactly right. This is a landmark decision for so many very reasons. First of all, it was kind of unique that we have a RICO charge for sexual activity. Generally speaking, you have this type of charge for a mob crime or something that has an enterprise that really is an incorporated company that is doing things that are illegal. Here, what the prosecution did is they said that he set up this enterprise for his brand, obviously, and for his music, but also to conduct this sexual activity that was illegal. And so this case is definitely landmark for that reason. The other reason, and Terry, you mentioned it, this is the first time that we've seen in the media like this, a case where we have women, young girls, and young black girls who are being used for the sexual pleasure of someone who is in the industry, someone who is famous, and yet it was a prosecution and it was a guilty verdict. And I think the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement, definitely contributed to that. And no longer will jurors be accepting the fact that just because you have a public image and a big name and you are a Grammy Award winner, you will no longer be able to take advantage of people, particularly young girls underage, the way R. Kelly did for decades.
So, Aaron, what's next? What does this verdict mean for R. Kelly?
Well, it means he faces decades in prison, but it's not the end for him. He's got another federal trial in Chicago. He's got state charges in Illinois to contend with after he was already acquitted of certain charges back in Illinois some decades ago. You know, we just heard from his defense attorney, who said the jury has cherry-picked some inconsistencies in testimony, but I'm not sure there were that many inconsistencies, to be honest, Kira. The testimony was fairly clear and straightforward, and prosecutors built a case that was basically the documentary Surviving R. Kelly. The The federal agents from Homeland Security Investigations saw the documentary. They said, wow, and they built a case based entirely on that and ended up with a conviction here. It wasn't terribly complicated once federal agents actually bothered to bring the case, and so now R. Kelly is unlikely, in all honesty, to see the light of day again as a free man.
And Terry, just to follow. Sorry, I'm sorry, Kira.
No, Terry, go ahead. We're in rolling coverage. Go.
All right, good. So. Terry, just to follow up on what Aaron was talking about, a lot of people might have heard about racketeering. It is a very serious crime. He's looking at hard time, isn't he?
He absolutely is. This is up to 20 years for the RICO, and for the Mann Act, another 10 years, and he's 56. So it does mean essentially that this will be, quote unquote, a life sentence, because it looks like if, in fact, he's sentenced to the maximum number of years, he will be in prison for a number of decades. And you're absolutely right. This is a very serious charge, and it could be a precedent for others to follow. Now that it has been accomplished in federal court, we could very well see when we have this sort of ring of enterprise where you are using your managers, your bodyguards, your security people to actually bring in these individuals, take them across state lines. You may very well be seeing other high-powered people who could be brought in with this type of angle under the RICO Act. Many people thought that it was unusual, that it would not succeed, but I think the prosecution, I agree, I think the prosecution did an excellent job of tying it all together, sticking to the facts, making sure they wove that story so the jury could understand why this was an important case where they had to find him guilty of RICO and violation of the Mann Act.
Terry, Aaron, stay with us. We want to get straight to the press conference. Gloria Allred just stepped up to the mics in New York City there. As you know, she was representing these victims. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
I'm attorney Gloria Allred. Today, R. Kelly has been convicted of very serious federal crimes. Mr. Kelly, who once described himself as a, quote, genius, end quote, to one of my clients who testified, is nothing but a convicted felon. I attended this trial because I represent 3 of the 6 victims for whom charges were filed in this case and who testified at this trial. In addition, I represent 2 other key witnesses who testified, and another victim, Jane Doe number 9, who was prepared to testify but was not called to testify. I have been practicing law for 47 years. During this time, I have pursued many sexual predators who have committed crimes against women and children. Of all the predators that I have pursued, however, Mr. Kelly is the worst for many reasons. First, he used the power of his celebrity to recruit vulnerable underage girls for the purpose of sexually abusing them. These were not May-October relationships, which is what his defense attorney wanted the jury to believe. These were crimes against children and some adults. Second, he used the power of his business enterprise and many of his inner circle employees to assist him and enable him in his plan and his scheme to lure his victims to him, isolate them, intimidate them, control them, indoctrinate them, punish them, shame them, and humiliate them. All of which made Mr. Kelly more powerful and more dangerous than many other sexual predators who operate without a network of financial and businesses to support and enable them. Third, the government proved that Mr. Kelly had genital herpes, that he knew that he had it, but failed to disclose it to his underage victims and adults, and that he failed to use condoms to protect them and lower the risk of contracting it. As a result, Many of his victims contracted this sexually transmitted infectious disease from him and will be forced to suffer from it for the rest of their lives. Fourth, in many cases, Kelly, after grooming, isolating, and intimidating his child victims, recorded them being sexually abused and humiliated by him. He directed these videos and produced them, not only for his own sexual gratification, but in some instances for the purpose of using these videos to silence and threaten his victims with public exposure of these tapes if they ever revealed what he had done to them. These tapes were not sex tapes. They were child pornography, which is a crime. In their closing argument, the defense had the nerve to bring up the name of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. What they failed to mention is that Martin Luther King Jr. said that, quote, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character," end quote. That is what the jury did today. Based on the evidence, the jury must have concluded that the defendant, R. Kelly, was no Martin Luther King Jr. Instead, R. Kelly is a sexual predator who is guilty of very serious federal crimes. The defense should be ashamed of even mentioning the name of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in any discussion of R. Kelly, a dangerous sexual predator who has harmed so many women and underage girls. The defense also argued that Mr. Kelly treated his victims, quote, like gold, end quote, targeting them, recruiting them, isolating them from their family and friends, forcing them to follow his abusive rules in order to control them, punishing them if they did not follow his rules to the letter, hitting them, threatening them, sexually assaulting them, giving many of them genital herpes, and victimizing them by recording many of them on child pornography tapes, is not treating them like gold. R. Kelly thought that he could get away with all of this, but he didn't. Because despite the fact that he thought he could control all of his victims, he was wrong. Many of his victims had the courage to speak up and tell their truth, under oath, in a court of law. I am very proud of my clients who agreed to testify in this case. I thank them for trusting me, law enforcement, and the jury to find the truth. My clients who testified fought through their fear and relived their painful experiences with R. Kelly and his enablers. R. Kelly's victims handled themselves with dignity and survived intense cross-examination by the defense. Because of their courage and the outstanding work of federal agents and prosecutors in this case, justice has been done. Let this be a message to other celebrities who also use their fame to prey on their fans and others who are unfortunate enough to come into contact with them. You're also likely to face serious consequences for your criminal conduct. The issue is not if the law will catch up to you. The only question is when. I also have a very short statement from one of my clients, and that's Sonia. I know that she is happy with the verdict that Mr. Kelly has been convicted, and thankful that the jury listened to her and to the rest of the witnesses. She says, "I've been hiding from Robert Kelly in fear due to threats made against me, and I'm ready to start living my life free from fear and to start the healing process." I want to thank the jury for considering the evidence and truly listening to my testimony. I want to thank the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal prosecutors in this case. Thank you for shining a light and helping me to get out from under that rock that I stayed under for far too long. Also, thank you to the federal agents who have listened to my story and for all that you have done to protect myself and others over the last 2 years. If you've been in a similar situation, I urge you to come forward as well. It will be like a weight lifted off of your shoulders. No one should have to live like that.
Gloria, do you feel, or do the women you feel like justice has been served today? Are they angry that it's taken many decades of allegations?
Well, I mean, since the verdict was not just announced, I've not had a chance to consult with all of them. But I know that a number of them feel that if he's been convicted of any crimes, whether or not it was crimes for which he was charged in reference to them, that they're happy that he's convicted.
Are they upset it's taken so long to get to this point?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question.
Sorry, are they upset that it's taken this long for this to happen?
Are they upset that it's taken this long for things to happen? Well, they understand that justice moves at a glacial pace. It's not like it is on television, which I've said many times. Everything doesn't happen within 1 hour.
Gloria, in regards to Sonia, the jury didn't...
And if you're just tuning in, just to bring you up to date, R. Kelly, once atop the world of the R&B charts, found guilty of all 9 counts of the racketeering and sex trafficking charges against him. Gloria Allred representing 3 of the 6 victims who actually spoke in court, hearing just gut-wrenching details of how this man sexually abused young children for years, even using the name of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Just sick behavior. Terry, Austin, just looking back at the fact that R. Kelly was acquitted on child pornography charges in 2008, and it just allowed his career to keep flourishing, keep abusing children. Now, finally, he has been found guilty on these charges. But think of all the kids that were sexually assaulted during that time period. And then Aaron Katursky pointing out that really it was this documentary series, Surviving R. Kelly, that woke up law enforcement in many ways to really pursue this case. What does that tell us about the power of someone like R. Kelly and his ability to just evade any type of persecution, or arrest, and the ability to keep abusing kids for so many years because of who he was and the power that he had?
You know, Kira, on the one hand, he is a powerful figure, a huge industry of music was backing him up, and it was all about the finances. He brought in money for the record companies, and he brought in money, obviously, for his brand. And he was allowed to continue this behavior, even though there were rumors way back when about the fact that he was spending a lot of time with young girls. Obviously, Aaliyah was the youngest, and ultimately he ended up marrying her before she was tragically killed. But there were so many other young girls, and he paraded them around. He did not hide the fact that he wanted to be with them, that he gave his telephone number to so many of them, and they lived with him. But it was because of our culture of allowing these powerful, generally speaking, male figures to dominate the industry and to dominate young girls, and in a couple of instances, young boys as well. But now, I think, with the help of the media, with the help of these movements like Me Too, we are actually playing a role. And when I say me, I say we, I mean the media is playing a role here as far as bringing to light what is going on and actually assisting the prosecution in where to look, how to gather this evidence, who to talk to. Many of the people that we heard on the stand, and we heard 45 witnesses over the course of 4 weeks or so, and most of them said the same thing, and many of them were on the show, the video of Surviving R. Kelly, that series. And so I think we're going to see in the future that the media is going to assist, and I think we're going to see in the future that the public is going to assist when it comes to making sure we get these people who are acting too powerful.
And we're going to get right to the acting U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of New York, who's giving a press conference right now. We'll come back to you, Terry.
And horrific details of their lives with him. No one deserves what they experienced at his hands or the threats and harassment they faced in telling the truth about what happened to them. We hope that today's verdict brings some measure of comfort and closure to the victims. This conviction is the latest in a long line of prosecutions by this office to protect women and vulnerable minors from sexual predators. Today's result was made possible by the outstanding work, dedication, and skill of the prosecution team. AUSA's Elizabeth Geddes, Nadia Shahada, and Maria Cruz Melendez. And senior investigator Keith Kolovich and paralegal specialists Kira Wenthen and Alyssa Fagel. Their grace under pressure was truly extraordinary. I want to commend and thank the Special Agents Ryan Chabot and Sylvette Reynoso of the Department of Homeland Security Investigations, under the supervision of Supervisory Special Agent Elvin Hernandez, for their outstanding work on the case, along with detectives from the New York City Police Department. Together, this superb team spent countless hours over years to sort through records and documents and interviewing over hundreds of witnesses to painstakingly marshal the facts and build a strong case. I also want to thank the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois and Cook County State's Attorney's Office for its assistance. Last but not least, I want to thank the men and women of the jury for their time and attention throughout the trial and for their careful assessment of the overwhelming evidence in this case. In rendering its verdict today, the jury delivered a powerful message to men like R. Kelly. No matter how long it takes, the long arm of the law will catch up with you. I will now turn over the microphone to HSI Special Agent in Charge, Peter Fitzhugh. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is
Peter
Fitzhugh, and I'm the Special Agent in Charge for Homeland Security Investigations here in New York.
All right, so there you heard it. Let's go back to Terry Austin. We were just hearing from the acting U.S. Attorney who brought this case and successfully convicted singer R. Kelly on 9 counts of racketeering and sex crimes, sex trafficking essentially, looking at very serious punishment. I want to ask you, Terry, about what we've heard both from the acting U.S. Attorney there and from Gloria Allred, the lawyer for the victim of, for the 3 of the victims in this case. Your heart just goes out to them. I've covered some child sexual abuse trials, and the verdict, when it comes in, you can almost sense it in them. Somebody listened. Their voice mattered. Somebody believed what they had to say. And I wonder what you think about the message this sends to all the victims out there whose cases have not been taken up because lack of resources, lack of notoriety, or who are still living with that pain and trauma without hope, really, of being vindicated by it. Do you think this is a moment for them?
I do, Terry. I think this is a big moment for them, even those individuals who aren't going to be able to bring charges against whomever their abusers might be. What it says is our sisters, our daughters, our mothers are no longer, and our brothers as well, going to be allowed to be abused like this for any reason, no matter how powerful the individual is or how much money that individual is making for any particular industry. So the message, I think, is very clear, and I think others who have been abused will feel some vindication. Obviously, the 11 victims who were involved with this case will feel vindicated. But I think others who weren't involved with this case, who might have met R. Kelly in the past and maybe been abused by him, or who may have been abused by other individuals, will definitely feel as though people are listening to him and people are caring about how they feel.
You know, Terry, you mentioned when we were talking about just how many years he was able to get by with abusing these kids, countless victims. and you mentioned it was the power of who he was as a musician and his brand in the industry. So what happens to his music now?
Well, he's going to have a lot of difficulty supporting himself, much less, he's trying to get out of paying child support to his second wife, and he is claiming that he isn't making any money. And that is the case because we know for a fact that there was a movement to shut down his music, to boycott his music, to mute R. Kelly. And he is going to be in a very difficult position now to pay any money to anyone he may be owing money to. And his brand obviously is extremely tarnished. I think I said he was 56, he's 54. If he spends several decades in prison, by the time he comes out, he won't be in any position, obviously, to resume his career. And if he's near bankruptcy now, I think we're going to see that he's going to be destitute. And he still has these other trials to defend himself, both in Illinois and Minnesota. He's facing some charges there as well. Illinois, he has both a federal court case and a state court case, and he's facing charges in Minnesota. So he's going to have to get together a defense team. He had a great defense team here, although I think pointing to the victims and blaming them was not the right tactic, but he is going to have to get a defense team for himself to prepare for these other charges against him.
Again, R. Kelly found guilty of all 9 counts of the racketeering and sex trafficking charges against him. He sat in that courtroom motionless as those charges were read. Terry Austin, thank you.
Thank you.
And we will be back with more news in just a moment. And welcome back. Thank you so much for streaming with us here on ABC News Live. We have some wonderful news to report, everyone. Our ABC News family is growing. Our Diane Macedo and her husband, Tom, have welcomed a baby girl. Diane says the whole family is back at home and that so far her 2-year-old is reacting, quote, surprisingly well to his new role as big brother. Terry, your heart melts.
Adorable, completely adorable. And the kids look good too. I'm saying, give that a little time. Indeed.
Exactly.
She always does. She always does. And they look adorable. Blessings on the little one and that whole family. It is great news for us. So from all of us here at ABC News Live, congratulations to Diane and to her family, and a big welcome to new baby girl.
And that does it for us this hour. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Kira Phillips.
And I'm Terry Moran. We'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Have a great day.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.